Margaret Wilson stood by her kitchen window, stirring her tea long after the water had gone cold. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the floor, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were elsewhere. For 3 years, her son Daniel had worked tirelessly toward one dream, opening his own medical clinic. She had listened to every struggle. The endless paperwork, the bank loans, the sleepless nights, the contractors who delayed construction, the expensive equipment. Every Sunday Daniel called her, sharing updates and frustrations. Margaret encouraged him through all of it. "You'll get there, sweetheart," she'd always say. And now, finally, the dream had become reality. At least, that's what she discovered from a neighbor. "Margaret, I saw pictures online," her friend Susan had exclaimed while they were grocery shopping. "What pictures?" "Daniel's clinic opening ceremony. It looked beautiful." Margaret laughed nervously. "Opening ceremony?" Susan's smile faded. "You weren't there." Margaret felt a strange knot form in her stomach. "No, I must have missed something." She hurried home and opened social media. There it was. Photo after photo. Daniel cutting a ribbon. Guests holding champagne glasses. Smiling doctors and nurses. Family pictures. Her daughter-in-law, Rebecca, standing proudly beside Daniel. Even Rebecca's parents were there. Margaret stared at the screen. Her hands trembled. No invitation. No phone call. Nothing. After several minutes, she gathered enough courage to call Rebecca. The younger woman answered cheerfully. "Hello, Margaret." Margaret forced a smile into her voice. "Hello, dear. I was wondering, when was Daniel's clinic opening?" A brief silence followed. Then Rebecca replied casually, "Oh, yesterday." Margaret swallowed. "Yesterday, yes. We had the celebration yesterday afternoon." Another pause. Margaret waited. Surely Rebecca would explain. Surely there had been a mistake. Instead, Rebecca continued. "It was lovely." Margaret's heart sank. "I see." Then came the words that hurt most. "We assumed you were busy." Busy. Margaret sat down heavily. "Busy. Yes," Rebecca said. "You usually don't like large gatherings." Margaret stared at the wall. For 68 years, she had attended every important family event. Every graduation, every birthday, every school play, every wedding, including Rebecca's. "I would have made time," Margaret said quietly. Rebecca's voice became slightly uncomfortable. "Oh, well." Everything happened quickly. A few polite sentences later, the call ended. Margaret remained seated for a long time. The house felt unusually empty. Not because she'd missed a party. Because she'd missed a milestone. A moment she'd waited years to witness. And nobody had thought she belonged there. That evening Daniel finally called. His voice sounded excited. "Mom, did you see the clinic photos?" Margaret closed her eyes. "Yes. Wasn't it wonderful? It looked lovely." Something in her tone must have reached him. His excitement faded. "Mom." Margaret hesitated. She didn't want an argument. She didn't want guilt. But she also didn't want to pretend. "I wasn't invited." Silence. Complete silence. Then Daniel said softly, "What?" "I wasn't invited." Another pause. Rebecca said she assumed I was busy. The line remained quiet. Finally Daniel spoke. "Mom, I thought Rebecca invited you." Margaret felt a small crack appear in the wall around her heart. "You thought she invited me?" Of course. Now it all made sense. Rebecca thought Daniel had handled it. Daniel thought Rebecca had handled it. And somehow nobody actually had. Still, Margaret couldn't shake one troubling thought. Rebecca's parents had received invitations. Every colleague had received invitations. Every distant cousin had received invitations. Yet nobody noticed Daniel's mother was missing. Daniel sounded genuinely upset. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "It's all right." "No, it's not. It's done." But Daniel knew his mother well. He knew she was hurt. The following week passed quietly. Margaret returned to her normal routines. Gardening, church, book club, tea with friends. Yet something felt different. A small distance had appeared between her and Daniel's family. Not anger, not resentment, just sadness. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. He stood at her door holding a small cardboard box. "Can I come in?" Of course. They sat in the living room. For several moments neither spoke. Then Daniel handed her the box. "Open it." Margaret lifted the lid. Inside was a brass plaque. the clinic's official name engraved beautifully across the surface. Below it were smaller words. Dedicated to Margaret Wilson, for every sacrifice, every encouragement, and every lesson in compassion. Margaret's eyes filled instantly. Daniel, he smiled sadly, I should have given this to you at the opening. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But I wasn't there, I know. His voice broke. And that's my biggest regret. For the first time since the phone call, Margaret saw pain in her son's eyes. Real pain, not embarrassment, not obligation, pain. I never wanted you excluded. She nodded quietly. I know. Daniel looked down. When Dad died, you worked 2 jobs. Margaret smiled faintly. Those years had not been easy. No mother wants her children to remember those struggles. I remember everything. His eyes glistened. I remember you skipping meals so I could have school lunches. Margaret laughed softly. That's not true. It is. No, Mom. She smiled. Maybe it was true. A little. Daniel continued. You bought my first biology books. You loved science. You drove me to volunteer programs every weekend. You believed I'd become a doctor before I did. Margaret wiped her tears. I was just your mother. No. Daniel shook his head. You were the reason. The room fell silent. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. I have something else. He placed an envelope on the table. Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation. Heavy cream-colored paper. Beautiful lettering. Mrs. Margaret Wilson. You are cordially invited to the official family dedication ceremony at Wilson Medical Clinic, Saturday, 2 p.m. Guest of honor. Margaret stared at him. A dedication ceremony. Daniel smiled. I'm holding another event. For me. For the person who made the clinic possible. Margaret laughed through tears. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Saturday arrived. Margaret almost didn't go. Part of her felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. But Daniel insisted. When she arrived at the clinic, she stopped in surprise. The parking lot was full. Friends, family, staff, neighbors, everyone stood waiting. Daniel walked toward her. This time there was no ribbon. No photographers, no politicians, no business partners, just people who mattered. As Margaret entered the building, she noticed something unusual. Framed photographs lined the hallway. Pictures from Daniel's life. His first day of school. Science fair competitions. Medical school graduation. Residency completion. Family celebrations. And in almost every photograph, Margaret, standing beside him, supporting him, cheering him on. The final picture hung near the reception desk. It showed a much younger Margaret sitting at a kitchen table. Daniel, age 10, was beside her reading a science textbook. Someone had written beneath it, "Dreams begin at home." Margaret pressed a hand against her chest. The emotions became overwhelming. Rebecca approached slowly. Her expression looked nervous. Margaret, turned. Rebecca's eyes were red. I owe you an apology. Margaret remained silent. I truly thought Daniel invited you. Rebecca swallowed hard. And when you called me, I realized something was wrong. She looked down. But instead of fixing it immediately, I got defensive. Margaret nodded gently. Rebecca continued. I was embarrassed. Why? Because I should have noticed you weren't there. Tears appeared in Rebecca's eyes. Everyone important to Daniel was in that room. Her voice cracked. And somehow I failed to notice his mother wasn't. The honesty touched Margaret deeply. Rebecca wasn't making excuses. She was accepting responsibility. I'm sorry. Margaret reached forward and squeezed her hand. Thank you. Rebecca began crying. Margaret pulled her into a hug. The tension of the previous week melted away. Not because the mistake disappeared, but because genuine remorse and genuine forgiveness had taken its place. Later, everyone gathered in the main waiting area. Daniel stepped forward. The room became quiet. He looked around before speaking. Many people think success is built by one person. He smiled. But that's never true. Heads nodded throughout the room. Daniel pointed toward his mother. My clinic exists because of countless sacrifices made by that woman. Margaret felt her face grow warm. When my father died, she carried our family. The room listened silently. When money was tight, she found a way. When life became difficult, she found strength. When I doubted myself, she believed enough for both of us. Daniel's voice trembled. Every patient we help here will benefit from kindness she taught me." The room erupted in applause. But Daniel wasn't finished. He walked toward a covered section of wall near the entrance. With one motion, he pulled away the cloth. A bronze dedication plaque appeared. The audience gasped. It read, "The Margaret Wilson Community Care Wing. Dedicated to a mother whose compassion inspired a lifetime of healing." Margaret covered her mouth. Tears streamed freely now. Daniel embraced her tightly. The applause grew louder. Yet in that moment, Margaret heard almost none of it. Because what mattered wasn't the plaque, or the ceremony, or the recognition. What mattered was knowing she had not been forgotten. Mistakes happen in every family. Invitations get lost. Assumptions get made. Feelings get hurt. But love reveals itself in what people do afterward. Daniel had chosen to make things right. Rebecca had chosen humility. And Margaret had chosen forgiveness. As the celebration continued, she looked around the clinic. Patients would someday fill these halls. Children would receive care. Families would find hope. Lives would improve. And a small part of her would live in every act of kindness performed within those walls. Later that evening, as guests departed, Daniel locked the clinic doors and walked his mother to her car. The sun was setting. The sky glowed orange and gold. "Happy?" he asked softly. Margaret smiled. "More than happy. Proud. Very proud." She squeezed his hand. "You became exactly the man I hoped you'd be." Daniel smiled. "No." He looked back at the clinic. "Just the man you taught me to be." And under the fading evening light, mother and son stood together, both understanding that the greatest success in life isn't a building, a business, or a career. It's the love we leave behind in the hearts of the people we raise. Heart.